Hello, my name is Teresa Paulus from the University of Lübeck, and today for this video abstract I would like to briefly walk you through our new manuscript, which is titled Questioning the Definition of Tourette Syndrome, Evidence from Machine Learning. This manuscript is recently published in Brain Communications. Definition and categorization of tic disorders appear clear. Tourette syndrome is diagnosed when a person has both motor and vocal tics, with an onset before the age of 18 years and a duration of more than 1 year. A chronic motor tic disorder is diagnosed when an individual has either motor or vocal tics with a duration of more than 1 year. In cases when tics have lasted for less than a year, a diagnosis of professional tic disorder can be made. However, in most of these patients, tics persist for more than a year, but tic severity is usually minimal in them. For clinicians, often the question arises whether present movements or vocalizations are tics or spontaneous movements or vocalizations. Even for Tourette syndrome experts, it is sometimes difficult to reliably discern tics from single spontaneous movements often seen in healthy people, because they can be very similar. Until now, it has not been examined which aspects of Tourette syndrome phenomenology are most useful in diagnosing an individual with Tourette syndrome, and which aspect is the best predictor to separate and classify patients with Tourette syndrome and healthy controls. To address this, in the presented study, a standardized video of 101 patients with Tourette syndrome and 109 healthy controls was taken. Each video was independently scored by 2 clinicians experienced in the assessment of Tourette syndrome. According to the modified Rush videotape rating scale, we scored 5 categories: the number of body areas, the frequency of motor tics, the frequency of vocal tics, the severity of motor tics, and the severity of vocal tics. In addition, we computed the motor tic count per minute. Extra movements or vocalizations that could not reliably be distinguished from tics were counted as tics. With these features, as well as age and gender, we conducted a support vector machine-based analysis. We included video weightings of 101 patients with Tourette syndrome and 109 healthy controls in the support vector machine-based analysis to examine the impact of each variable for the classification of individuals into the 2 groups Tourette syndrome and no Tourette syndrome. The results show that the feature severity of motor tics is the best predictor to separate and classify patients with Tourette syndrome and healthy controls. This is also demonstrated in this figure. The first bar shows the prediction accuracy of the feature contributing most to support vector machine classification performance. This first feature is the variable motor tic severity. The single feature motor tic severity is sufficient to identify an individual as having Tourette syndrome with an accuracy of over 91%. The other bars reveal if and how much the cumulated predictability increased when adding more features. As you can see in the figure, adding more features to the analysis does not significantly improve the predictability. In conclusion, the results of our work show that the severity of motor tics, but not vocal phenomena, is the best predictor to separate and classify patients with Tourette syndrome and healthy controls. It appears that the severity of motor tics is far more important for the grouping of Tourette syndrome than vocal phenomena. This finding questions the validity of current diagnostic criteria for Tourette syndrome, requiring the presence of both motor and vocal tics. Further, the negligible importance of vocalizations for the categorization of Tourette syndrome is important for the public misconception of Tourette syndrome as a disorder, mainly presenting with vocalizations including coprolalia. Vocal phenomena are often very prominent in patients with functional tics. Therefore, in patients with prominent complex vocalizations including coprolalia, also a diagnosis of functional tic disorder should be considered. Finally, we want to thank all participants for taking part in this study. We would also like to acknowledge the funding support we have received from the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. And thank you for your attention.